Bammers and dear Bammers, we are delighted today to receive Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, prolific writer, expert on all military issues, and man of war, having turned into a man of peace, here in our studio on live cam to talk to us about matters that matter.
Yes, we were thinking we will start with the Ukraine question, the kind of thing that everybody's focalized on right now, and to enlarge it into, as you say, and as is known, the implications of this conflict are enormous, as are the historical precedents. And so I think we can kind of zoom back and see what the effects of this war are, this conflict are on a larger scale, socially, economically, militarily, and historically.
Sounds good with me. It's thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
We do too.
Well, the fundamental question that everybody's wondering about is, how long will the conflict last? What can we expect as an outcome? How can we finish it?
And annexed to that question is the one about the U.S. aid, the $2.9 billion aid that the U.S. just granted to Ukraine, knowing that it's to be distributed through time. And so it's a huge amount of ammunition and equipment that would probably never be used. And so our question also is this really a military war or a political war?
Well, I mean, the short answer is it's a political war. War is an extension of politics by other means. So pretty much every war is a political war, but we know that this one has a, what triggered this war wasn't just the situation in Ukraine. What triggered this war is Russia's decades-long dissatisfaction with how NATO, the United States, the European Union were setting the table, so to speak, when it comes to European security. It's been Russia's desire to, especially under Vladimir Putin, to roll back some of the advances territorial-wise and structurally that had been made by NATO, infringing on what Russia believed not only to be its borders, but its so-called sphere of influence. And if you go back to December of last year, December 17th, I believe, Russia submitted 2 draft proposals, treaties, one to the United States, one to NATO, in which they viewed as using these as a framework for a larger discussion on transforming European security framework in a manner that respected Russia's legitimate national security interests. Russia was ignored on both fronts. And I think it's the fact that Europe was unwilling or unable to discuss this with Russia. The United States definitely was unwilling to, combined with the collapse of the Minsk Accords, a full acknowledgement pretty much by the United States, France and Germany, that there was no interest in forcing Ukraine to comply with its obligations under Minsk. So, from Russia's perspective, the diplomacy angle had been shut down. Worse, from the Russian perspective, according to none other than former Ukrainian President Petroshenko, who said Minsk was always a sham. We never intended to implement Minsk. We always meant to use Minsk as a vehicle to buy time so that NATO, and I need to point out that NATO also includes France and Germany, the 2 partners in the Normandy format for the Minsk Accords. So one has to recognize that neither France nor Germany were negotiating in good faith. If NATO's intention was to train Ukrainian forces since 2015, since Minsk II was implemented, or at least signed, through 2022, train them for the sole purpose of being able to fight the so-called separatists, and I'll get to that definition in a second, in Donbass, and indeed the Russian military to evict pro-Russian elements from the Donbass and probably Crimea. That means that the West was never interested in peace, always only interested in war, which therefore adds further legitimacy to the case being made by Russia for justifying its military action under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, citing preemptive collective self-defense. By the way, the same concept that was cited by NATO when it justified its military action against Serbia in 1999. So it's not like Russia just woke up one day and said, we're going to invent international law. Russia took the same page that NATO used against Serbia and perfected it.
It seems like quite a suicidal measure because first of all the aid that's being given, but also for Europe as far as Nord Stream 2 is concerned. Germany seems to have had didn't seem to be so willing at first to go along with this closure. So it seems that this all-out war, there's maybe something behind it. And Danielle has a question concerning that.
Yes, we had in Germany always a government that has been defending the energy independence and our purchases from Russia. The former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder is working with Gazprom as in the board, and the fact that the Germans were strong-armed into canceling Nord Stream 2 once it was completed seems to be a complete suicidal mission. Is that because NATO underestimated Russian resilience, or is there another reason for continuing to prepare more and more sanction packages? Do they still believe it can work, or is it just now a question of is that maybe a smokescreen for some other agenda?
Well, I'm a big fan of Occam's razor, meaning that the simplest answer is usually the right answer. And I'm not a big fan of complicated political conspiracies, especially when we take a look at the European Union and expect that kind of competence to be exuded from them. I apologize for being negative, but I don't give the European Union credit enough to carry out complicated conspiracy theories. What I do know is that since 1992, both the United States and NATO and Europe have been pushing for a defeated Russia. I mean, they expected the Russia that came out of that emerged from the collapse of the former Soviet Union to be weak. And indeed, many policies were implemented designed to keep Russia weak, to exploit Russia economically, and to politically correct term, neuter Russia politically. And what I mean by that is one only has to take a look at Boris Yeltsin and understand the absolutely catastrophic impact that Boris Yeltsin had and the policies of his government had on Russia and Russia development during the decade of the 1990s. You will not find a single Russian alive today who lived through that time saying, yeah, the 90s were good. And maybe the oligarchs thought the 90s were good, but the average Russian that had to suffer because of the policies of Yeltsin. And to think that Yeltsin was the legitimate expression of the Russian people, one only has to look at the election of 1996 to know the absolute lie. The United States accuses Russia of trying to steal an election in 2016. The United States stole an election in 1996. We bragged about it. Time magazine, front cover, best democracy money can buy. We stole an election in Russia. And so we have a guy named Vladimir Putin who, we call him the accidental president. He sort of stumbled into the presidency, but when he got it, he wasn't willing to play out the same playbook as Boris Yeltsin had. And so from 1999, 2000 until today, the policies of the United States, Europe, and everybody else has been to keep Russia down, not to allow Russia to emerge strong. At the same time that the policies of Europe were to enjoy the peace dividend. Europe was no longer willing to make the investments into national security and national defense that had existed during the Cold War. So the militaries of NATO literally atrophied. They're rotten from the core. If you compare and contrast the military capability of NATO today with what it was in 1988, it's night and day, with night being today, day being back then. There also was, I think, when you have somebody that you don't respect, you don't take the time to study them. I'm of the age where I grew up during the Cold War. I'm giving away my age here, but that's the fact. I was a Marine during the Cold War. My Russian area studies took place during the Cold War. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that nobody treated the Soviet Union lightly. Everybody took the Soviet Union seriously. And so when you studied the Soviet Union through the vehicle of Russian area studies, it was serious study about a serious opponent. After 1992, I think that seriousness element was removed. And people studied Russia not so much as trying to truly understand Russia, but rather how to economically and politically exploit Russia. And so a model was created of what the ideal Russia would look like in the West, and Putin deviated from that model in the extreme. So all of the effort has been to try and put Putin back into his place. And it's done so based upon a fundamentally flawed model. And the reason why I bring this up is, you know, prior to this conflict breaking out on February 24th, you can go back and you can see many people saying that, what is Russia? Russia is nothing more than a gas station disguised as a country. A gas station, I mean, talk about grossly misrepresenting a reality, because Russia is so much more than a gas station masquerading as a country. Russia is a nation with, you know, thousands of years of cultural history, you know, religious history, the language. The Second World War resonates so deeply with the people today to sit there and simply say they're just a gas station disguised as a nation. Well, I'll tell you what, if they're the gas station, then Europe is the car. And if you want to sanction the gas station, you better darn well have another gas station lined up, or your car is going to go on empty. And suddenly, who looks like the fool? The gas station or the vehicle operator? Russia knows energy security far more than Europe ever does and did. And Europe never recognized this. I mean, everybody looks to Saudi Arabia because the Saudi Arabia has been built up as this, you know, as sort of the engine of the Western economy when it comes to energy security. Aramco overdeveloped the Saudi oil fields so that it could accelerate when the West, mainly the United States, needed more oil. Saudi would hit the accelerator. When we needed less oil, Saudi would come off the accelerator. And everybody said the world revolves around Saudi Arabia, ignoring the fact that one of the major players in the global energy security reality was the Soviet Union and now Russia. In Russia, even more so than Saudi Arabia. Russia has gone head to head with Saudi Arabia a couple of times and emerged victorious. The Russians know the global energy economy. They understand what their capabilities are. They understand you know, what they come back on, what they need to sustain. The West built a sanctions program designed to target Russian energy without understanding Russian energy, without understanding their own energy. I mean, you know, this is a broad model, but I would just ask Europe, Germany, and everybody else, take a look at the average price of energy throughout the 1980s and 1990s and compare what you were actually paying for Russian gas. And then look at the difference, and that's the amount of money you saved by buying Russian gas. Cheap Russian gas gave you the ability to have this economic surplus, and why you don't recognize that, not you, but the European people. So they basically shot themselves in the foot. That what's happening to Europe right now because of their sanctioning of Russia is 100% a self-inflicted wound. In fact, Russia has bent over backwards not to accelerate the economic decline of Europe. Russia continues to sell gas and oil to those European entities who want it. And indeed, Russia sits back and allows the indirect transfer of, I mean, what hypocrisy exists in the West? What stupidity, where you say we're not going to buy direct from the Russians, but we'll go buy it indirectly from the Indians, but pay 4 times as much. Come on, Europe, use your brain.
Maybe we can ask about what the West really makes, what the West is made of. We are put together into one pot with the American interests. American interests are very different from European ones. And at the moment, we are conducting policies which are absolutely suicidal for our economies. So I don't think that all our politicians have lost their minds. I think there's a lot of leverage by American policy makers on European policies. And I would like to ask you, how does this work? What kind of leverage does the US have on European politics? We know, for example, the NATO general is making the decisions in NATO. Stoltenberg is just the porte-parole, the spokesman. How does it work? What tools does the US have to influence European policies?
Well, the United States, since the end of the Second World War, at the end of the Second World War, the United States emerged as the dominant democratic power in the world. I mean, the former colonial powers of Great Britain and France were on the decline. Their colonies were rapidly being dismantled. The rest of Europe was in a shambles. You have, the United States. We view World War II from a prism of December 7th, 1941, until May of 1945. Europe has to view the prism from September 1939, when Europe went to war, and the consequences that were accrued by Europe were devastating. And so the United States emerged as the lifeline. We were literally the economic and political lifeline for Western Europe. Without the United States, if the United States had withdrawn, as many of the isolationists in America wanted us to do, there's a good chance that Italy, France, and maybe others would have gone communist. Who knows what would have happened in Germany? For people who say that in Europe, who say we enjoy being a Western liberal democracy, you enjoy that only because the United States made a decision to stay in Europe. Now, this was a very selfish decision, by the way. It's not as though we were being benevolent. This was about the United States leveraging its position to be a global hegemon. Now, the United States won't admit that. We like to say that we're a benevolent hegemon, but the fact is, when we speak of the rules-based international order, which is, of course, the fundamental foundation of current and past U.S. foreign policy, what are we speaking of? Who wrote the rules? I don't think France sat down and helped write the rules. I don't think Germany did either, nor the British. The rules were written by the United States. We wrote the rules, and then we imposed the rules on everybody else. So the entire global structure, from the International Monetary Fund to the World Bank to it's a SWIFT, the bank, the way banks communicate, everything is controlled by the United States. The United States has the ultimate vote. We pretend to have democracy, but at the end of the day, if we pick up the phone, it happens the way we want it to happen. It doesn't happen the way Europe wants it to happen. So we control everything. And that's before we get into NATO. Europe has sold its soul to the United States about NATO. Europe doesn't exist as a military organization without the United States. If you remove the United States from the equation, Europe has nothing, literally nothing. I know people are going to say, wait a minute, they spend billions of dollars every year to build this, that, and the other thing. It's a facade. Ask Germany to generate an armored division today, right now, drop of that. Germany, put an armored division in the field, can't do it. France, put an armored division in the field today, right now, can't do it. Nobody can. Why? Because they've let their military atrophy on the premise that America will always be there for them. And the thing is, America isn't going to be there for you. This is the great lie that's emerged from this entire NATO fiasco. What has the United States brought to bear on this problem? As Russia seeks to mobilize 300,000 reservists with the potential of mobilizing 25 million if necessary, what has America done? We put an armored brigade in Poland. That's 5,000 troops. We're going to bring another armored brigade. That's 5,000 more. Ukrainians were losing 500 to 1,000 troops a day at some of the heaviest combat, and that's what the Russians not even trying. NATO needs to understand that they just gave away all of their available arsenal to Ukraine, and Russia has destroyed it. Russia has destroyed it. Yes, there's some weapons still around, but by and large, all the T-72 tanks that were from the former Warsaw Pact nations that went to Ukraine, they're gone. Russia killed them all. Everything you give Ukraine gets destroyed. That's just the ultimate thing. And what's left for NATO? Nothing. NATO has no reserves. If NATO went to war today, even if they could assemble these forces, they'd run out of ammunition in 2 weeks. And are European countries really ready to suffer these casualties? Ukraine has suffered at a minimum over 60,000 dead. 60,000 dead, killed in action. That doesn't include the wounded. It's probably an underestimation. The number could be as high as 80,000 when you factor everything out. Which European nation is ready to suffer 80,000 dead today? To fight for Ukraine, by the way, not to defend themselves, to fight for Ukraine, whose president says the Nazis, some people think they're cool. No, there's nothing cool about Nazis. Nazis have never been cool. That's why we went to war. And then in World War II, we went to war to eradicate the scourge of Nazi ideology from the world once and for all. And yet there it is, alive and well and breathing in Ukraine. And NATO and the United States are feeding it. Now, is this something that Europe wants to do? I think the answer is no. There might be some European leaders that, but remember, almost every European leader today owes their existence to the United States because they bought into policies that are nothing more than an extension of American foreign policy, national security policy. There really is no independent European policy. So the people who make policy for Europe are American. But look at European Union and unity. Does it really exist? Is there really Europe? I don't know. Why are the Poles demanding that the Germans provide reparations going back to World War II? Why are the Germans now questioning whether or not Silesia should be Polish? Maybe they'd rather have it to be German. What about the Turks and the Greeks? I know the Turks only have a limited presence in Europe, but they're getting ready to go to war over islands in the Aegean Sea. France is ready to join the side of Greece if that conflict takes place. I just named 5 nations that are NATO nations, fundamental members of NATO, and they're getting ready to go to war against each other. And then within the European security framework, what kind of unity do you have when the European Commission has to threaten its constituent members with sanctions to guarantee that they align themselves politically to a policy that's written in Washington, D.C.? Hungary is threatened with sanctions, Poland, and now Italy just had an election. I guess we're not democratic after all, because if the Italian elections produce a result that are inconvenient to the European Commission's view of the world, they threaten sanctions. Europe is a dysfunctional entity right now, which is one of the reasons why there's such an easy pushover for the United States, because there is no viable alternative to the United States in Europe today.
What are the channels to push over our politicians? What are the tools the US has to give a push to our politicians? What is the level?
Well, we know historically, I mean, I can't speak today because A, I don't know, and B, if I did know, I couldn't talk about it. But we know historically that the Central Intelligence Agency is heavily involved in everything that happens in Europe. We monitor every one of your elected officials' telephone calls. We own every single European politician. We have the goods on every single one of them. Everybody's human. Everybody's made mistakes, and we captured every single one of those mistakes. So when the time comes, we can put that leverage, and we know this. Look at John Bolton putting the pressure on Hans Blix back in 2003, promising to go public with some incriminating information we had about Blix's private life. And what's shocking to me is that when Bolton said this in public, that Europe didn't rally behind Hans Blix. Europe just sort of went mute and went, yeah, okay, well, America, you just do what you got to do, America. Just leave me out of it, because yes, we know that you got the same folder on me as well.
We had the scandal with Angela Merkel, who was eavesdropped upon by the intelligence services, and yeah. Obama knew about it, and it just was pushed under the carpet.
Knew about it. Obama ordered it.
Well, he ordered it.
Okay, yes. Let's not say he knew about it. Obama ordered it. These decisions, when you target a leader of that stature, that decision's not made by some low-level flunky. Scott Ritter working in the CIA doesn't wake up one morning and go, I want to listen to Angela Merkel's phone. Scott Ritter has to write a request that says, this is a target I want. The target goes up to the top, and they go, holy cow, Merkel, we got to go brief the president, which means that somebody made the case that we have to listen to Angela Merkel, and the president went, that's good, let's do it, which means every time he spoke to Merkel, he was a liar. But pretty much that's par for the course for every American politician when it comes to how we treat our so-called allies. I think Europe needs to wake up to the reality that you're not allies, you're colonial subjects, because we wouldn't treat allies this way, but we do treat our subjects this way.
What is the role of the World Economic Forum in this way of managing?
The World Economic Forum is sort of the it's the public face of the rules-based international order. I mean, the rules-based international order is a concept. The World Economic Forum is the mechanism used to implement the concept. It is how the political and economic elites coordinate and work together to maintain this rules-based international order. You take away the rules-based international order, there is no World Economic Forum.
We had a question also concerning this is, the New World Order. There is the World Economic Forum. How do you see the role of the BRICS in this and their position in relation to the politics of this one world government?
Well, BRICS is part and parcel of a trend right now globally, a geopolitical trend away from American singularity. Because when we speak of, the World Economic Forum, anytime you speak of the G7, there is no G7, there's the G1. It's America, and everybody else salutes smartly and does what America tells it to do. And the world is tired of it. And the world is finally maturing politically and economically to the point they can actually do something about it. And BRICS is a manifestation of the global frustration about the dominance of the United States in the G7. BRICS is literally the opposite number to the G7. It's in direct competition with the G7. And if you take a look at the capabilities of BRICS versus the G7 today, the G7 is just a pathetic little organization of shrinking economies, while BRICS is a very vibrant multipolarity. BRICS is doing something that's quite interesting, we haven't seen the exact fallout, but the petrodollar, the dollar is the global reserve currency. BRICS is in the process of ending that. They are building this basket of currencies. They are encouraging direct exchange with national currencies that isn't relying upon the dollar or the euro. And this is amazing, because you do that and you literally liberate yourself from much of that which gives the rules-based international order its leverage. That's the economic leverage. The United States has been intimidating the world through what we call secondary sanctions. I mean, it's ridiculous that the sanctions aren't approved by anybody other than the US Congress. But if you as a sovereign nation, any aspect of your economy touches an American dollar, and we disagree with how that dollar is being used, then we can sanction you. What kind of sovereignty does Europe have when every time it wants to have, for instance, an independent economic relationship with Iran, the United States comes in and says, if you do that, we sanction you. And then what does Europe do? And as a result, they surrender every time. BRICS represents a new movement in the rest of the world that rejects this, together with, for instance, the new Russian-Chinese alignment that came into being in a very public way on February 4th of this year, when Putin met with Xi Jinping in Beijing. And they issued that 5,000-word joint statement that basically said, this is the end of the rules-based world order. It's the beginning of the law-based world order, the law being the United Nations Charter and the principles enshrined in the Charter, which exist but have never been implemented because the United States never intended them to be implemented. The United States has controlled the Security Council, controlled the United Nations, controlled virtually every aspect of the United Nations work since its inception. Here, Russia and China are saying that day is over. The American singularity is over. We're now looking at a multipolar reality that has teeth. BRICS has teeth. BRICS is not a paper tiger. BRICS has teeth, and it's getting stronger, and soon it's going to bite with a vengeance. And the G7 might find out that it's going to get nibbled on.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people's ignorance about all of the historical implications of what's going on, for example, Russians' almost genetic apprehension of Germany and its expansionism, people don't realize, or even, the history around the Black Sea and how NATO is just taking all these nations around the Black Sea to really encroach on Russia. I have a feeling that ignorance and arrogance are kind of the biggest enemies of the West, and I'm wondering how you see the midterm elections happening in the U.S., knowing that both chambers are Democrat, and now the stakes are pretty high. I don't know how you see that, and what could be the consequences after that.
Well, it was a Democrat named James Carville who back in 1992 provided some political advice to then candidate Bill Clinton. Clinton, of course, being the smart Oxford-educated man that he was, liked to pontificate about foreign policy and how smart he was on foreign policy issues. But Clinton was going up against a guy named George Herbert Walker Bush, who didn't study foreign policy. He was foreign policy. And Bush had just won a war in Desert Storm. Bush was a former ambassador to China. And if you go head to head with Bush on foreign policy, you were probably going to lose. But Bush had articulated something, read my lips, no new taxes was a thing he said, even though any student realizes he was forced to do that by Congress, who tied his hands otherwise. But Carville recognized that that was a fatal flaw. So he told to Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. It's the economy. And ultimately, whatever political changes come in the U.S. after November, it'll be because of the economy. Now, Russia plays an indirect role in the economy, given what's going on with sanctions, et cetera. But there's the United States, the population of the United States has been by and large programmed to be anti-Russian. So I don't expect any major shifts in foreign policy on the notion that suddenly people woke up about how bad our policy is towards Russia and we should do the right thing because we need to respect Russia's history. We don't know Russia's history. We barely can point Russia out on a map. But what we do know is the economy. When prices go up at the gas station, when prices go up at the food market, when supply chains are broken, and this is a consumer-based economy in the United States. That's what makes us tick. We'll pay the bills, we'll work long hours, we'll die early, whatever. But it doesn't matter as long as we're comfortable. But you start breaking the economy, and then our comfort goes away, and that's when. You don't want to be an American politician because the American people do believe in voting. We do believe that it's a fundamental duty and responsibility of the American citizen. And if a politician does something that it breaks our comfort zone, we hold that politician to account. And I think the Democrats are getting ready to be held to account about the economy. But then the Republicans have to be careful because if they seize control through electoral process, now the burden's on them. And then they have to ask tough questions. And even though the Russians may not want to articulate sound policy about Russia, it's the economy, stupid, which means at the end of the day, getting control over global energy markets might be the number one priority. And to get control over the global energy markets might require the kind of political compromise with Russia that otherwise would not ever be considered. So I do think that while it won't lead to immediate change, we have greater potential for change vis-a-vis Russia with Republicans in charge than we do with the Democrats, because the Democrats are politically aligned with this neoliberal movement that Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, and others, Clinton, prior to that, have been, have carved into stone. And it's very difficult for the Democrats to break ranks from that, to deviate from that. But the Republicans, thanks to Trump, by the way, it's very hard for me to say many good things about Trump, but what Trump did is break the Republican Party. The Republicans lined up 17 of their top candidates against him in 2016, and he crushed them all. Crushed them. I mean, they didn't stand a chance. Trump came in and he broke the Republican Party, which means that the Republican Party right now is more capable of embracing something new than their Democratic counterparts.
Without neocons, because I know, like Wolfowitz, Cheney, Kissinger, we don't really hear much about them anymore, though they might still have their hand. And I don't know, as far as the Republican Party goes, where that neocon kind of agenda stands.
Well, what we saw when Trump came in is we saw that the neocon element of the establishment, what do you want to call it, deep state, whatever you want to call it, this permanent, non-changing element that influences government tremendously, retreated to the Democratic Party. You saw they retreated to the safety of the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party was still embracing the establishment. Joe Biden got elected because he's the establishment. That's all he is. He's the establishment. The Republicans don't have that same neocon element. They just drove Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, out. So the hold of the neocons on the Republicans is over. right you're looking at right now is the Republican Party trying to desperately redefine itself in a manner that isn't sunk by Trump, but they can't divorce themselves from Trump because what Trump brought to bear, whether you like it or not, is a reality of America that had been suppressed for a long time. I mean, it's an ugly reality. American populism is not pretty because it's not manifested on a notion of intellectual reasoning. It's manifested on a notion of blind American visceral desire to be great again. What does that mean, to be great again? Make America great again. Sounds good. No one's ever actually had to define it because most Americans who support it really aren't interested in definition. They're interested in feeling good for the moment. And that's a very dangerous thing. And the Republican Party is desperately trying to come to grips on how to control that, corral that, empower that so that they can win elections, but not allow it to produce another Donald Trump type character. An American president can go out on the campaign trail and say whatever he wants to say anything to get elected. But once he's elected, he sits down and the men in the dark suits come up with the briefcases and they educate him on the reality. And that's so true. There is an establishment that, and Donald Trump found out the hard way. Donald Trump went head to head against the establishment and he lost. The establishment beat him down. What happened to, why can't we be friends with Russia? You're the president of the United States. Why can't you be friends with Russia? The establishment didn't want to be friends with Russia. The establishment sabotaged you every way, which way from loose, up to and including getting you impeached twice. I mean, so, the establishment is real, it's powerful, and it has to be it has to be factored into anything political here in the United States.
Kind of like the promise to not budge 1 inch eastward with NATO in 1991.
Well, James Baker found out the hard way. He's the one that met with Gorbachev and Shevardnadze and gave the verbal assurance that wouldn't happen. But when he came back and he briefed the establishment went, no. NATO's expanding because we can't allow Russia to get back up. We got to keep Russia down. And that's what NATO expansion was always about, keeping Russia down.
Now, what is the risk of the Ukraine conflict spilling over into Europe, into the rest of Europe?
That's up to Europe, to be honest. Everything that's happening to it right now and what's going to happen this winter is the fault not of Vladimir Putin, but of Joe Biden and every American president prior to that. Europe could solve its energy problems today simply by turning on Nord Stream 2. It's that easy. And all Schultz has to do is pick up the phone and tell Biden, pound sand. I don't know if that's a bad term, but it just means go to where. Why doesn't Europe do this? Where is the courageous European politician who says, I care more about my people than I do about serving American global hegemony? When is a European politician? And we know the Germans don't care because, darn, didn't the foreign minister come up and say, I don't care what the German people think. I'm going to support Ukraine no matter what. What constituency empowered her to say that? The American constituency. She doesn't work for the German people. That is proof positive. Nobody works for their people. Macron doesn't work for the French people. Schultz doesn't work for the German people. Truss doesn't work for the British people. So this conflict is about Russia eliminating an existential threat to its existence, and that was Ukraine as it was being organized and functioning as a de facto NATO proxy. Even though Ukraine wasn't a member of NATO, the military being built by NATO served NATO's interests. NATO sacrificed Ukraine. And here's the other thing I want to say to every European. Look at how the United States is willing to sacrifice Ukraine. Look how we're willing to allow the Ukrainian people to be slaughtered, Ukrainian soldiers to be slaughtered, the Ukrainian economy to be slaughtered. Look what's happened. Ukraine is going to lose 20% of its land mass that quick later on this week. They may lose more. Odessa and Kharkov are very much at risk. Ukraine may not exist as a nation state. Why? Because the United States deemed it to be in their best interest to sacrifice Ukraine in the hope that somehow it weakens Russia. Russia will not be weakened. Russia is going to win this conflict militarily. They're winning it economically. And when Europe collapses this winter in a sea of revolutionary change, probably, I don't know, Germany. Why is Germany putting troops on the streets in October?
Do you feel like people are really starting to, it's kind of like a movement that's coming? People are really starting to see things for what they really are, and effectively like these kind of uprisings that might happen differently because people aren't just angry, they're informed more and they can act differently. I don't know. How do you see
I mean, that's a tough one. I think we know that mainstream media, at least in the United States, and I suspect throughout Europe, is controlled by the interests that are aligned with the government, and so you're not going to get the truth from mainstream media, especially not the kind of truth that involves the deep exploration of the issues. Sometimes the truth is superficial. 20 people died, but then as you back away, they were killed by, because of Russian policies, and Putin is evil and Russia is evil and all that. So the defenders of the Western media will say, we didn't lie, we reported accurately, 25 people died, but then you spun it in a way that that continued the process of the brainwashing of the public, so to speak. Now, there is a lot of social media today. First of all, understand, I don't know what's going on in Europe directly. I've only heard things, but in the United States, you get deplatformed quick if you express anything that goes against the narrative. Twitter has banned me, simply pointing out that the Bucha massacre was more likely than not carried out by Ukrainian security services as an act of revenge against those Ukrainian citizens who are deemed to be collaborators with Russia. It wasn't a Russian war crime. But merely raising that up and saying this is a possibility gets you deplatformed. YouTube, if you say anything that can be deemed as algorithmically being pro-Russian or sympathetic to the Russian, deplatformed. And so what that means is, to get your message out, you have to retreat deeper and deeper and deeper into the social media, into the internet, and you're going into a realm where there's no quality control whatsoever. They call it free speech, but free speech to what end? Because it's in this realm that the propagandists take over from both sides. It's in this realm where people just start spewing things, saying things. So if you want to be an honest broker, but you're now sucked into the sewer of the internet, your message gets drowned out by the sewage. And so it's very difficult to say people are being informed because there is no quality control. And unless the people put their own filter on, but now to build that filter, how much time does it take for somebody to become truly informed on the issues, especially in the United States where you're already working 40, 60, 80 hours a week. And when you come home, the last thing you want to do is think long and hard about the roots of the conflict in Ukraine. If we put half the time we put into studying sports, into studying foreign policy and international security affairs, maybe we'd have an informed public, but we don't. Yeah, I think people, they're out there, but there's a danger that people get motivated about the wrong things, about things that aren't quite accurate. And here's the danger. The danger is that normally information serves as its own braking mechanism, meaning that if you're an informed public, you don't tend to overreact because you operate in the middle ground of relative intelligence. Intelligent people who are informed don't tend to get spun up so fast that they go revolutionary one minute or fascist the next minute. It's the uninformed mass that sits there and they stew in this sea of ignorance that they think is not ignorance because I listen to Scott Ritter on YouTube. I'm a very smart guy because I listen to Scott Ritter. No, you're not. If Scott Ritter's telling you what to think, you're not a smart person. You're only a smart person if you tell yourself what to think, by questioning everything. But they're not doing that. They're locking in to a certain wavelength on the internet. And then what happens is when the facade of society collapses and they're confronted with the ugly reality of the decisions that have been made in their name, their choices become extreme in nature. And this is the danger, I think, of revolution, because there's a saying, every society is only 9 missed meals away from chaos and anarchy. Mm-hmm. And I think Europe is in danger of having several 9 missed meal moments this winter. And I don't know what happens in Germany when all the factories shut down, when there's massive unemployment, when there's no heating, when there's nothing, when society breaks down and the troops go in the streets. What are the troops going to fire on the people? I think Tsarist Russia serves as is a historical example of how that's a bad idea. You start ordering troops to fire on the people, the troops, especially in a conscript military like the Germans, tend to turn their guns on the authorities that tell them to fire. I'm not encouraging any violence in Germany. I hope nobody takes what I'm saying. That I hope Germany can solve this thing peacefully through the political processes. I'd like to believe people could vote people out of office who don't represent what they believe in. But I'm just afraid that Germany is facing the kind of societal collapse that democracy doesn't provide an adequate outlet to resolve. And when you put troops in the streets, this is literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't know why the German government would even consider putting troops in the streets to control public unrest. Why not hold a snap election? Why not hold a snap election? Well, because you'll lose. And so it's all about holding on to power, and you'll do whatever it takes to hold power. But if you believe in democracy, why not hold a snap election to preserve the democratic nature of your country, to let the people actually put people in office who represent their values? And this is the great awakening in Europe. I think the European people are waking up to the reality that those whom they elect to represent them in higher office don't represent them at all. They represent the United States. Maybe it's high time Europe divorce itself from the United States. I don't like it because I do like going to Europe. I love Europe. I love European culture. I love the European people. But you know what? Maybe it's time the Europeans don't view the United States as the white knight riding to their rescue anymore. They should start viewing us as the black knight who seeks to subjugate them, under the illusion of economic well-being. But really, it means you've given up all your rights, anything.
And maybe even use their intuition, knowing that, for example, our European leader, Ursula von der Leyen, wasn't elected. Our prime minister in Belgium wasn't elected. The political systems are such that they aren't elected. And I think people are waking up, hopefully, with their intuition saying, wait a minute, there's a problem here.
Like Liz Truss in England as well,
Yes.
not elected.
Mm-hmm.
No, well, my mom said if I can't ever say anything nice about somebody, not to say anything at all. So we'll move on.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. Do you have any more questions?
I would like to know from your calculation, from your estimation, how long will the conflict in Ukraine last? How much longer?
Well, here's the thing. The United States is talking about expending a lot of money. They've already spent a lot of money. And there's a lot of expectation for Europe to follow through. I think the European well's dry. I don't know how much more Europe can give to Ukraine without decisively impacting their own national security. So I think there's this Ukrainian engine that's been built, this engine of war, and the engine functions so long as it's fed, oil and gas. The oil, the lubrication, is the blood of the Ukrainian men that are being fed in there like a meat grinder. And there's still a considerable amount of oil that can be brought in to lubricate the engine. But the fuel that makes the cylinders fire is the weapons. The Ukrainian army has lost virtually every weapon it possessed at the beginning of this conflict. The only thing that keeps the Ukrainian army going is this new weaponry coming in from the West. And I do think that they're going to have an energy crisis pretty soon where there's just not going to be any more weapons to give them. Meanwhile, Russia, on the other hand, they've been fighting this war with one hand tied behind their back because of the limitations of the special military operation. NATO decided to up the ante by turning the Ukrainian army into a NATO army. That's what's there today. It's a NATO army. NATO equipment, NATO training, NATO intelligence, NATO communications, NATO everything to fight Russia. And Russia now has said, okay, if you want to change the game, we'll change the game too. It's no longer about a special military operation in Ukraine. It's about the defense of the motherland. There we are. Boom. Whoop, there it is. Now what are you going to do? Russia just doubled down, put all the chips on the table and called NATO's bluff. NATO's got nothing to call. They don't have any chips left. And if they call, they go bankrupt. So I think, this is going to unfold on a pace that's dictated by Russia. And Russia's already committed to the mobilization of 300,000 men. That means that Russia is going to allow these 300,000 men to be assembled, organized, and trained responsibly. There's no panic in Russia. You don't see Russia like Ukraine grabbing people and throwing them straight to the front lines. The Russians are going to take time to get these 300,000 up to speed. That means that they're not even going to be introduced until late December, early January. And then after that point, Russia will then begin the very bloody process of accomplishing every task set out by the SMO. Demilitarization, and because NATO has taken it upon itself to transform the totality of the Ukrainian military into a NATO military, demilitarization defined by Russia means getting rid of all NATO aspects. So the entire Ukrainian military will either have to be destroyed on the field of battle or surrendered and dismantled. Denazification. And again, I know we haven't talked about this too much. There's a real Nazi problem in Ukraine. It's a real Nazi problem. It's not a theoretical Nazi problem. It's not a peripheral Nazi problem. It's a real Nazi problem staring Europe in the face, and Europe is deciding, and the United States is deciding to ignore it. Russia's not ignoring it. Russia remembers what the Nazi ideology did to 27 million of its citizens. It never forgets. And so Russia is going to denazify Ukraine. Now, when this war first started, denazification could have been accomplished simply by having the current Ukrainian government change the constitution, which removes not only saying we want to be part of NATO, but it outlaws Stepan Bandera and the ideology of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. Outlaws it. It dismantles the monuments, bans the political parties, criminalizes this kind of stuff. That could have been done, and Ukraine could have survived. Today, as the Russian government has said, the Ukrainian government is a Nazi government today, which means denazification means the total eradication of the Ukrainian government. So anybody who doesn't understand that this conflict will not end until the Ukrainian military has been 100% destroyed and the Ukrainian government has been eliminated, then you don't know what this war is about. That's what's going to happen. Russia will accomplish this on its own timetable. Now, I believe that Russia can accomplish this with the forces allocated, but it will probably not be till midsummer, end of summer 2023 until this conflict ends. This conflict, if it's fought along those lines, will cost Ukraine 250,000 people because the gloves are coming off, the Russians aren't playing games anymore, and it's going to turn into real war. You're going to say, oh, well, Scott, it's a real war right now. No, it's not. What it is right now is a partial war, a war where Russia is not using all of its power. What's about to become is a real war. And Europe's about to wake up to what real war is about. Maybe this will be a wake-up call to Europe too, realizing that the United States are promising you this notion of security through NATO. It was just a facade. Europe isn't secure at all. I don't think Europe has to worry about Russian overreach. Russia has no intention of moving into Poland. Russia has no intention of driving into Moldova or taking Romania. Russia has every intention into ensuring that Ukraine will never be a NATO nation and that the Nazi regime, the Nazi ideology will be eradicated once and for all. I'm not sitting here saying that I support the Russian annexation of these territories. It's a very complicated geopolitical question and legal question. But I think NATO loses a lot of its its legitimacy by saying what happened in Kosovo is okay, but we can't let Russia do the same thing in Odessa. The United States, it was funny. Blinken was asked the question, what about the Golan Heights? Israel just annexed the Golan Heights. What's America's standing on that? And the answer was, well, the Golan Heights are very important for Israel's security, given the Syrian regime. Well, if that's what you're saying, then Russia's annexation of mWUblyM6 is very important, given Russia's security situation vis-a-vis NATO. Look, the people I feel sorry for the most are the Russian people of Ukraine. Why? People call them separatists. They're not separatists. There was a coup d'etat that took place in Ukraine, where the legitimate government of Ukraine was ousted by an American-backed coup d'etat. So the Russians who stood up in eastern Ukraine and said, no, we don't support these coup plotters, they're not separatists, they're actually legitimate patriots. They're the ones who say, no, we refuse to be governed by coup plotters. And then for 8 years, they had to suffer under incessant shelling. They killed thousands of their civilians, thousands of their men, while the world ignored it and supported a sham peace process. So I feel sorry for them. The next people I feel sorry for are the bulk of the Ukrainian people themselves, people who labored in impotent ignorance, I'll call it. They just pretended what was going on in the Donbass wasn't going on. They labored under this artifice of a good life, the pretense that everything was okay, that NATO was going to be their savior. The Ukraine that existed prior to February 24th will never exist again. And that's a tragedy for the Ukrainian people who viewed that as their nation and their homeland.
It has been extremely constructive to hear you out and to talk to you. I would like at this point mention that you've just published a book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. We will put the link and the book cover online and share it with our public. And we would like to thank you very, very much for your time. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you very much.